Hello everybody, and welcome back to another video. In today's video, we'll be taking a look at the 2024 presidential election and specifically what the New York Times has to say about the results in the competitive states. So the New York Times, I believe 2 days ago, released polling averages in the 7 most competitive states for 2024. They're calculated by the NYT. They're their own aggregate. So it's kind of like a 538 or a Real Clear Politics, just another variable we can factor in when looking at this election. And so this is the first time they've done this ever, releasing their own poll aggregate. It's very interesting, and I personally am a fan of it. I think it is better than RCP and potentially better than 538. So we're gonna see what it says. But as you can see, they have a function for just the 1-1 matchup, head to head Biden versus Trump. They also add in RFK Jr., who right now nationally is polling at 8%. We'll talk about that in a second, but just to speak about the head-to-head polling, nationally it's a tied race, but in the 7 swing states, Trump is ahead. And I've mapped this out. The states that are not polled in this aggregate are just labeled as safe for either party. And then the 7 states are shaded varying shades of red. The closest polling state is Wisconsin, where Trump leads by 1%. And then North Carolina, Trump's up by as much as 5%. So the result is very good for Trump, and we are going to get into the state-by-state analysis here in 1 second. But first, I want to talk about RFK. And I kind of wanted to take this video as an opportunity to talk about why I think that the impact of RFK Jr. on this election is right now being greatly overstated. So I'm going to make probably a whole nother video about this just separately. But I do not expect RFK Jr. to get 8% of the vote nationally, as the New York Times aggregate has right now. This is for a few reasons. First is that I think that the more distance between now and November leaves more room for variables and good things to happen. And regardless of what your political views are, I think we can all agree that third parties are generally, if excess of third parties is weird. It is not normal in American politics for a third party to do well. That is a very unique outcome that is not very common. And I apologize sincerely if I'm offending any libertarian or Green Party viewers or even members of the Constitution Party, the 6 of you out there. Just kidding. But like, being completely objective here, third parties usually don't do well, and when they do well, that adds another variable to any sort of election. And this is kind of how I deal with third parties. Those of you who watch my channel in 2022 know how I feel about third parties in general. I think that the party that is favored almost always loses, or not loses overall, but is almost always worse off when a third party gets in the race. So, for example, in the 2022 Oregon gubernatorial election, there was evidence the race was going to be close even before there was a third-party candidate, but Betsy Johnson, a former Democrat turned independent from the state legislature, ran as an independent candidate against Tina Kotek, the Democrat, and then Christine Drazen, the Republican. And Kotek was the narrow favorite before Johnson emerged as a key force in that election. But once Johnson emerged, there were some people who were saying that it was good for Kotek, and some people were saying it was bad for Kotek. And so Kotek won by around 4 points, which is not that impressive a margin for a Democrat in the state of Oregon. But my belief firmly is that if you took Betsy Johnson out of that race, Kotek would have done better. Why? Because Oregon is a blue state, because it's a progressive electorate broadly, and adding in more variables and more levels of complexity always hurts the party that's favored to win. And so that is why I think broadly a third party would be bad for Joe Biden. Now, obviously, if the third party candidate was Donald Trump Jr. and he ran on the exact same platform as Donald Trump, that would be bad for Trump. But 9 out of 10 cases, the third party is bad for Biden. And that's the thing with RFK Jr. When you listen to his views, a lot of the things that he says are closer ideologically to Trump or to the right wing of the GOP than they are to Biden. But again, I think RFK Jr. poses more of a threat to Biden than he does to Trump, because Biden, again, is the incumbent. Biden got 51.3% of the vote last time, so he has more to lose. And more importantly, the average voter hasn't done research into what RFK's platform or policy is, right? Like, one of the national polls that added RFK initially, I think this was back in the early days of spring, I think it might have been in March or in April, they did a poll and they asked voters who they'd vote for between Biden, Trump, and RFK Jr. And they did two screens. The first screen was without giving any context about RFK Jr.'s platform. And the second screen was telling voters about RFK Jr.'s position on vaccines. And once voters knew what RFK Jr.'s position on vaccine was, his support among Democrats collapsed. Like it got a lot worse among the Democrats who were sampled in that poll. It got worse with independents. But with Republicans, people who were saying they were intending to vote for Trump, they were more favorable to RFK. They were more open to RFK Jr. But the problem for Biden here is that the average American doesn't know RFK Jr. stances on vaccines, for example, which would be an issue that would drive Democrats against RFK Jr. and maybe people in the Trump coalition towards RFK Jr. And so because of that, but even though RFK Jr. might be ideologically closer to Trump, especially on important issues, he takes away more from Biden. And especially that last name. The Kennedy name is a big factor in Democratic politics. And if that is the first impression you get, that could really hurt Joe Biden with voters who don't know a lot, maybe who don't like Joe Biden, who definitely won't vote for Trump and just want a way out. So whether they vote for him or Cornel West, that's another thing to consider. But that's my position on why third parties are going to likely hurt Joe Biden. Now, the good news for Biden is that RFK won't receive 8% of the vote, and I want to go back to talking about that. So in 2016, for those of you who were old enough to pay attention to that election, or for those of you who've done research on that election, in 2016, I didn't have this channel. I didn't know that much about politics. I paid attention to it, but I couldn't ever do any sort of logical analysis. I can barely do logical analysis now. It would have been bad 8 years ago. But in 2016, I remember, and if you do research on this yourself, you'll see this, in May, June, July, Gary Johnson, the Libertarian candidate, was polling nationally at a threshold that would have gotten him on the debate stage. And had he maintained his polling average of, I think you need like 6% of the vote nationally in polls to make the debate stage, he was polling at just around that. He would have been on the debate stage. But in August and September, as the election got closer, his numbers dropped. Well, that's for two reasons. The first is that third parties are always, at the beginning of the cycle, considered interesting. Voters might say they're going to back them, and then they come home to their party that's ideologically close to them. So if you're a conservative who's dissatisfied with your candidate, maybe in April you say, oh, I'm going to vote for the Libertarian. By November, you've come home. Same thing for many liberal, progressive voters. So that's the first reason. The second reason was that people kind of come back to understand, like people broadly do understand that a third party can't win. And if you want to go vote for a third party, go right ahead. But know that vote will not do anything towards moving your candidate closer to the White House, because third party candidates do not, in this political climate, in the way the system works, have a chance of winning the presidency, right? And so I'm not going to tell you who to vote for. I've never done that on this channel, but like that is a pretty objective, notion and dynamic in this political system. And maybe in May, if you're thinking about voting for RFK Jr., or in 2016 you're thinking about voting for Gary Johnson, you tell a poll you're voting for that candidate. But by October, by November, you know that you have two choices, and you kind of have to, even if you don't like them, you kind of have to make one of those two choices, or just stay home and not vote, which is functionally the same thing as voting for a third party candidate in terms of likelihood of winning the White House. So that is my RFK speech. His support will decline, just like Gary Johnson's did in 2016. And even in 1992, Ross Perot was at one point polling like he was basically taking a third of the electorate. And then by October, November, he was I think he got 21% of the vote nationally or something like that. But he didn't get a third. He wasn't even with Clinton or Bush. And then in the aforementioned 2022 Oregon governor's race, every poll, I think 90% of the polls in that race overestimated Betsy Johnson, the independent candidate. They all had her, mid to high teens, maybe low 20s, and she got like 8% of the vote when it's all said and done. So RFK's at 8% right now, and he's actually been going down in these polls. I don't know if this one's This one's not interactive, but if you go to the 538 average, he's gone down, I think, a point or two in the past few months. So he's already trending that way. And so that's why I'm going to look at this average and talk about these numbers, not these numbers, because sure, RFK will get maybe 3, 4, 5% of the vote nationally. It won't be near 8. And by the way, a lot of these numbers, like Biden at 40, Trump at 41, that doesn't do us any good, because we know they're going to get more than that. So it's a tied race nationally. I think Trump has the narrow lead. It looks like he's actually I can't tell. It could be it's an exact tie down to the 10th place in terms of decimals. I don't know how far they round it, but nationally it's tied. But obviously matters is the swing states. The closest one's Wisconsin. Trump's up by 1 there. But in Michigan, Pennsylvania, he's up 48-46. He's up by 2. Go to Nevada, he's up by 4. Go to Arizona, he's up by 3. Georgia, he's up by 4 as well. And then North Carolina, he's up by 5. So what do we notice? Well, the states that are swinging most in favor, at least in this aggregate, states that are swinging most in favor of Trump are in the South. The biggest swing that Trump is getting is in Nevada, I believe, which is a 6.5-point swing. Arizona's a 3-point, if you're just calling it, 3 and 4. Arizona would be a 3.3% swing. Georgia would be a swing of, I think, similar to Arizona, 3.3, or maybe 4.3 actually. North Carolina is about a 3.5-point swing as well. So Nevada's the biggest swing, but the swings in Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina are all bigger than the swings in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, because these states are closer. So that is what is interesting, is that in the Sun Belt states, the states that are more diverse, that have been trending towards Democrats, Biden does worse. He does better in the states that are more white, that have been trending towards Republicans in recent years. So again, the polls in general are showing Biden collapsing with young voters and with voters of color, holding up well with white voters and gaining with old voters. So they're basically showing like the reverse of what you would always expect from any election. But the aggregate reflects that. And so in the New York Times, this is their aggregates map. Again, this is not their prediction. A lot of people, when they see 538, their polling average, they think, oh, well, this is your prediction. No, but this is their aggregate. So right now, Trump in this map is the clear favorite. Now, do be warned that most of these states, specifically Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and I believe likely Arizona, are within the margin of error. Around a 3% margin of error is typically expected of an aggregate. It's usually maybe 2.5, really. But so Biden could still win the election within the margin of error just by winning the 3 Rust Belt states. But it's a clear Trump win if these states go as the polls suggest. 312 electoral votes, that would be a bigger win for Trump than his initial 2016 victory. So that's the map per NYT. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you thought about my discussion about RFK Jr. and third-party candidates. I'll make a video about that probably tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. And always, as always, let me know what you want to see. So thanks so much for the view, and I'll see you all next time.